All right, you're watching Boomtown, a podcast about Huntsville's explosive growth, both on and off the arsenal. I'm Cameron Walker, your host. I'm the broker owner of Cameron Walker Realty, located right here in Huntsville. And you're joining me and my co-host, Megan. Love that you guys are here. We ask that you subscribe so we can keep you informed of everything that's going on in Huntsville. Welcome back to another episode of the Boomtown podcast. I'm so excited today. I have a special guest, Craig Paulus with Paulus Law Firm and Foundation, Title and Escrow. So thank you, Craig, for coming out to hang out with us today and share your expertise.
Thanks so much. Glad to be here.
Absolutely. So most of you won't know Craig, but Craig, when you call me at 8:29 at night on Sunday,
I don't call you. You call me at 8:29 at night.
Yeah, I'm talking to the clients, right? So they call me with a question at 8:29. I call you at 8:30.
Yeah.
So there's a difference between a realtor, a broker, and an attorney question. And that's my job to know those differences. And Craig's the one I go to when I get beyond the scope of my job.
Well, I'm glad you do.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, thank you again for joining us. Really want to dive into those questions that people have that I get all the time that now I have the opportunity to share with a bunch of people at once instead of just one.
Okay.
And those are really the differences in the Alabama contracts versus other places around the U.S.
There's a lot of them.
Yeah.
And the most important is that, everybody says all real estate is local, and it really is. And Alabama's got some features in its laws that are unique. So the contracts are unique. And really, in this area, in North Alabama, you're going to see one of two contracts right now. The Huntsville Area Association of Realtors has the contract that's my favorite because I'm most familiar with it. It's been evolving for the last, for as long as I've been in town, and I'm a native, but I practiced law elsewhere for a while, came back, hung a shingle, and started doing happy law. I love it. But it's been coming along for, time out of mind. Everybody who's in real estate knows it well in this area, and it has a lot of features that protect clients and keep deals together. The other contract is sort of promulgated by the Alabama Association of Realtors, AAR, and the AAR contract has a lot of different features, and we're seeing more people use it now than they used to for various reasons coming out of the NAR settlement last summer. So a lot of the practice changes required changes to the contract. So that's what that was about. But we have here in Alabama, unique laws on buyer beware. We're one of the last buyer beware states.
Yeah.
We have a unique law on the right of redemption, and that has a lot of legal implications. There's been some recent changes that have to do with co-ownership, joint tenants, and common ownership, where you have more than one owner of a piece of property. And all those things are addressed in our contracts, and it can get you can get into the weeds pretty fast on these contracts because they're addressing things that are kind of unusual and what newcomers don't always expect.
Yeah. One of the things I really focus on when it comes to that buyer beware aspect is the difference between here and, I'd like to say, the coastal states and the big cities. That's where you seem to have more seller disclosure laws. And here we have so few, right? You really have to thread the needle to warrant having a disclosure versus getting out of one, which is what we see in other states. So is that something you hear a lot? I know I'm a small microcosm. You've got a bigger global.
Right. So I do see this, and I can tell when somebody's dealing with an amateur or a newcomer realtor. So everyone's got to start somewhere in real estate, right?
Right.
But real estate's got more fakers than a middle school band concert. I mean, last year, I think the National Association of Realtors did a survey, and I think over 70% of real estate agents didn't do a single closing.
I heard that too.
Right. And I think it's in the 80 percentile range, around 80% did less than two.
Yeah. So,
there's lots of realtors who really, they're hobbyists.
Yeah.
They aren't professionals like you. They aren't professionals like you see. And so they'll come here and maybe they think they've gotten a referral from their local person they trust. The trouble is that guy's just looking for a referral fee, and he found somebody who's in his network, and he doesn't know this person for real. So they'll come here, they'll get connected with an amateur who hasn't prepared them for the differences in Alabama. Something gets a little sideways, and this prospective buyer who's used to California or New York or something will come in and say, "Where's this seller disclosure form? Why didn't somebody tell me about this?" Well, welcome to Alabama. It's a buyer beware state, and everything that's important to your decision to buy, you need to ask ahead of time.
Yes.
Everything. So, and don't make any assumptions, right? So my favorite example, and sometimes it's just people getting cold feet and trying to wiggle out of a contract. But my favorite example is an agent called me and he had a client who got cold feet and got really mad because he was looking at the covenants for the property. And he said to his agent, "When were you going to tell me I couldn't park my boat in the driveway?" And he's like, "I didn't know you had a boat."
Yeah.
And he's like, "Well, I don't have a boat, but I might want to get one." So the point of that story, what I like about it so much, is not that it's ridiculous and it's true, but also that it illustrates why I think buyer beware is not a bad approach.
Yeah.
If something's important to you, ask. If something's important to you, find out. If you want to park your boat in the driveway, figure out if you can do that.
Yeah.
Because I don't know if you have a boat, and your agent doesn't know if you have a boat, and your agent doesn't know if you want to raise chickens in the backyard.
Right.
If you do, you should ask some questions. If you want it to be an Airbnb, you need to be really careful in this area. That's not really easy in Huntsville. And there's, things like that. If it's important to you, ask. And I can go through 100 examples, but ask.
Yeah, I mean, it's great points that you make there. Some of the things I talk to people about is buying new construction versus used to get around some of these challenges. The other thing is getting those HOA covenants and restrictions in advance. And if you're buying an older home, you think it might need some updating, we really want to know what that updating, if there are any real repairs that are necessary. So perhaps even getting like a pre-inspection before you make the offer, because it's very limited once we're under contract what the seller obligation is based on the inspection findings. And what I tell people is it always opens up a new round of negotiations. If we're in a slow market where buyers are hard to find for the specific house, great, we have more leverage in the negotiations. If they got 3 offers on this house, they're going to tell us to kick rocks and take the next one, particularly if one of the later offers is higher or better than our offer, right? So a lot of that comes down to strength in negotiation. And where people are coming here from those coastal cities or larger cities, they're just accustomed to getting everything they want when they ask or they can walk. And this is a conversation I had to have up front. In Alabama, when you make an offer on a house, kind of like being in the Army and firing a shot, that bullet's down range. So we need to make sure we aim before we pull the trigger.
Yeah. And you can put in contingencies for, it's contingent on making sure that it appraises for enough, that we get the financing, that we like the inspection, that the repairs estimate doesn't equal more than X.
Sure.
And sometimes, you do it regularly in a commercial setting, but in the residential space, it's okay to say, "Hey, give me some time to evaluate this." And I want to, back up a little bit on the buyer beware. It's not a free for all for sellers to lie to you. They can't conceal anything. And once they start telling you stuff and giving you assurances, they're kind of on the hook for everything. Right. But, and I'm giving you the kindas and the maybes because law is great. You learn the rules of contract on the very first day of law school. You show up, you read what we call the hairy hand case. You don't really want to know, but anyway. And then the rest of the 3 years is figuring out those things that are exceptions to the rule. A deal's a deal. There's lots of exceptions.
Sure.
So put a contingency in there if you've got a concern or if you need a little more time. And we see that all the time. It's regular.
And that's something I have to explain to people too. There's federal fair housing laws and other restrictions. Then there's state level laws. There's local rules and regulations. And all of these are in the mix. And then there's also contract law. Mm-hmm. So real estate and contract law kind of get dumped into a bucket and mixed together, but there are differences between the two.
And there's also old fashioned land laws, right?
Yes.
And covenants are a big important part of that. And covenants there are condo rules can be different. Sometimes people assume, I can bring my Great Dane in here. And sometimes condos say you can only have a 20-pound dog.
Yep.
And I would, move if my Labrador couldn't move in with 200 pounds. I lost him. It's the worst. But, the covenants, people make assumptions that's like, it's not in a subdivision. There's no covenants.
Right.
That's not the case. It's very common in certain areas that grandpa's got the farm and he's going to finally part with a little corner of it to sell to somebody. He goes, well, I don't ever want X to be on that. So you can never have, whatever, or you can never, re-subdivide it to a lot that's smaller than 5 acres because I want to keep it looking like a farm. And those things are enforceable. And guess what? Grandpa's kids live next door to you still, and everybody knows. So when you go in there and say, I really want some pot-bellied pigs and a fleet of goats and roosters that wake everybody up in the morning, they might not like that. And they might have anticipated and put a covenant in place that will stop you.
Absolutely. We actually closed with you guys last week on a lot out in Tony. And it was surrounded by an actual subdivision, but 3 lots within it were not part of the subdivision. although they did have their own deed restrictions, they weren't subject to the covenants. So it was a really unique situation. I think we had 56 inquiries on that lot, and we cut off half of them just because it wasn't in the subdivision they wanted to be, and we cut the others in half just based on the deed restrictions. So knowing that going in, right, and being able to disclose that to buyers allowed us to find the right buyer and have a lot more smooth process than we would have if we had not disclosed those things. So to your point a moment ago, it's not that the sellers have a free-for-all and don't have to disclose anything. And we also are required to answer honestly and ethically when somebody does ask. So that's another thing on the buyer side as an agent. If we have specific questions, the age of the roof, any foundation issues, the age of any of the appliances like the HVAC, we ask those going in so that we can get an honest answer going in so that we know what we're looking at, right? If we're buying a house with a 50-year-old AC, we got to take into account that you're going to have to replace that pretty soon.
That's
so if it's got a 3-year-old roof, we're probably in good shape on the roof.
Right. And something it's customary, and you talked about that second round of negotiations, customary to get a home inspection. For a lot of people say, I want an inspection. When things were crazy hot during COVID, it was like, just give me the house, I'll take it, and if it's terrible, I'll just sell it to the next guy in 20 minutes. I mean, it was going so fast, but now get a home inspection. And you raise a point. One of the things that you always see in a home inspection report is totally unenforceable. It's at the back, and it says the cost, our liability for preparing this report is limited to the cost of what you paid. So you pay $400 and you're like, oh man, I need a new $12,000 HVAC. I only get $400 from this home inspector. That's not enforceable.
Yeah.
And a friend of mine who was a real estate attorney was actually involved in the case that turned into that.
Really?
Yeah. It was the Alabama court said that's unconscionable, that somebody could limit their liability on something so important to just the cost of preparing the report.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so we talk about the home inspection and what their liability is. A lot of people are like, oh, I'll just get a home warranty. And you both know, both you and I know those are about as good as toilet paper when it comes to the quality, depending on the provider. And there's so many stipulations. So one I ran into maybe 2 years ago with a seller, he had a leaky water heater on his way out the door. So he's like, oh, I'm just going to have them replace it. Well, they had stipulations within their warranty agreement that he had to drain it once every year. It was 4 years old and he'd never drained it. So they declined his claim, and it's there in black and white. There's not really an argument against it.
Yeah, it's there's so many terms and conditions. I called I won't name names, but it was Lowe's, and I called them the other day, and I had to listen to 45 seconds of terms and conditions before I could get to through the robot to start punching buttons to get talk to a human. That's that. We actually have some incredible technology here at our company at Foundation Title and Escrow. Our advanced algorithm developed here on the Arsenal by NASA has determined that if somebody calls us on the phone, they want to talk to a human being. And so we have human beings, and we try to answer on the second or third ring. Every time it rolls backwards to a whole lot of people, but it's something crazy's happening if a human isn't picking up the phone.
I don't even know if you guys have voicemail because I've never gotten to it. Jasmine takes my call and I go right through to my That's true. That's true. But if it's not an attorney question, if it's just a closing or a time or coordination, I'm going to talk to Peyton or Dana. So I go through the proper channels. It's not to call you at night and say, hey, can you handle this for me tomorrow? I bug you when it's really important.
Well, you're always welcome to. So, but yeah, that's, there's, these expectations and that you have, they're always, there's always maybe something. There can always be a problem. There's frequently a problem in real estate. I think Morticia Adams said it best when she said, what's normal for the spider is chaos for the fly. And
right.
We have that up on our refrigerator at work. And I try to remind my staff that, the clients feel like they're trapped in a web and they're being devoured by a venomous arachnid. And that's what real estate is for those people. So, that's why you need good professionals helping you and making it comfortable and a little more transparent, because it's a difficult process.
Absolutely. And coming into it with the right mindset and being, setting those right expectations prevents you from feeling like you're in the web in most cases. No transaction, no matter how easy, is always going to hit bumps. And having an expectation those bumps are coming, how we're going to adjust to those, how we're going to react, what is due to you in the contract versus the other party, and what responsibilities you have within the contract. If we've covered those in advance, when we hit these bumps, it's so easy to go over them. Where I find, particularly when I'm on one side of a transaction and another newer agents on the other side, is they have a calamity and I've got a bump. And we're both in the same contract, trying to get the same house sold to the same clients and get to closing. And my clients are prepared for what's going on, and they're overreacting as an agent because they did not prepare their client. So they're having a whole set of negotiations between the agent and the client instead of just the agent advocating for the client.
Yeah, and I like to tell agents, and good agents know this, that, you are a trusted advisor and you give advice and let clients make decisions. Don't try and make it your deal and force anybody's hand on anything. But you're right. It's, stuff does go wrong. And the best advice I got when I was getting married, I'm coming up on 29 years married to the most wonderful woman in the world. And, but when we were getting married, it's tense. I mean, let's face it. She's been, walking down the aisle in front of her dolls since she was like 6 years old. I mean, she's planned out this wedding. Okay.
Yeah.
And somebody said to me, you know what? 3 things at least are going to go wrong.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, you're going to be married.
Exactly.
So, in real estate, usually a couple things are going to go wrong. A tree's going to fall on it. The hot water heater's going to break the day you're moving. Somebody's going to scratch the hardwood floors, getting the refrigerator out. Somebody's going to say, wait, that refrigerator is supposed to stay. A good contract will tell you what happens when those bumps.
Absolutely. That's a top 3 question for me because I include it in so many videos because it is market dependent about that refrigerator. In our contracts, it does not specify the refrigerator. It specifies the built-in appliances. So if the refrigerator is built in, sure. Otherwise, we need to write it in. And
the built-in, like you think it's built in because it has a front panel that matches the rest of the cabinet.
Oh.
It'll slide out.
Yeah.
I mean, they all do, so you can maintain them. Be more specific.
Yeah, absolutely. Window treatment, chandeliers. So I just had a client that we went under contract with last week. They really love the chandelier in the dining room. So although it's a fixed and it should just come with the house per the way the contract's written, to make it smoother, we said ensure that the chandelier transfers and conveys in ownership, right?
And if you're selling, before you take pictures, before you list it, before you let anybody look at it, if you're taking that chandelier with you, take it down.
Yes.
Put something else up.
Yep, absolutely. Same thing with anything else in there, right? So something else that kind of stroked my brain right there is a lot of times we reach out for you for how to phrase something within the additional provisions. So as an attorney, as an agent and a broker, I am not an attorney. I do not need to be practicing law, and I don't need to just write in my own provisions, although that seems to be the standard practice around here. So one of the things we really look to you for is we have some just saved verbiage for things like the appraisal contingency. But when we run into something new, we do go to you guys, you or Ryan, to ensure that we're writing it into the contract correctly. So that's something else I want people to know is just because you want it written a certain way as the client doesn't mean we've put it in the right legalese.
Yeah, we'll help. It's pretty routine to help people navigate something new or unusual. We do a lot of closings. We've done a gajillion closings. And at Foundation, I think we hit, it's a sorry dog that won't wag its own tail. We hit 100,000 closings last year, and that was in the first 12, 13 years of the company. And I've only been with the company for 4 years.
Yeah.
And, I've probably done 15, 16,000 in my career. And it's, so we see, more than, there's those counter signs that you see up on the billboards, like I've done so many clear. I'm like, I've done more.
Yeah.
So, and there's attorneys who've done more than me, and they're a great resource. We want to help we want to help everybody.
Yeah.
That's why we do this.
Absolutely. It's an industry, right? And it doesn't have to be combative. It's always going to be competitive, and it should be. That's what America's built upon, and Alabama really engages in that strongly. And I myself am, right? But it needs to be cooperative competition, right? We all need to be working by the same rules, trying to achieve similar goals of getting the house and the deal closed, although we're advocating for one side or the other.
And that's especially true for me. It's interesting. I came from a litigation background, and I did that for a few years. I feel like I served my time. And coming into real estate, I love real estate because it's kind of like a math problem. You've got land records and you got law, and here comes the answer of what you need to do to get a deal closed. But when we work in these land records, they're public records. I get to see everybody else's homework, right? I get to see what everybody else's work product looks like.
Yeah.
And I'm really happy to say I practice in a town where I can, look at the most recent deed. And if I see a certain name, I'm like, yep, this is probably right. And I hope that people say that. I think people say that about us too. Our work is really good. But that's not the case universally. Sometimes you go to places and you're like, hey, this guy doesn't really have a high understanding. Yeah. But increasingly, everybody specializes in the law now. The real estate, there's not a lot of part-time, I do real estate and personal injury, or I do real estate and whatever. You do real estate, you probably do real estate.
I've run into a few of those and they've always gone wrong.
Well, there's small town practitioners who have the old school approach, and some of them are super attorneys. The difficulty that really has driven the specialization has been the technology, the requirements for insurance and fraud protection, and we have to be absolutely on top of our game with that. So when you're doing that, it's demanding and expensive to even get your foot in the door in real estate.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you're looking at being bonded for higher dollar transactions than somebody that's in a $20,000 lawsuit when you're talking a $1 million home, right? So there's a significant difference between the two. And there's a significant cash outlay for the buyer in those two, right? You put down $2,000 on a car versus $120,000 on a home. That's a significant difference for people. And that's what I always try and keep in mind is how many commas and zeros they are in these transactions.
Yeah. And you bring something up. I mean, it dovetails with what I said earlier about home inspectors can't limit their liability to the $400 they cost to prepare. I don't limit my liability to, we don't even try, right? It's silly. But it brings to mind the difference between title insurance and these opinion letters that are gaining in popularity. And people act like there's some new innovation. So the difference is we search the land records and I can give you an opinion saying, I'm a lawyer. I've looked at the land records. I think this is who the owner is. And that person should sign the deed to you. Great. And that's what that says. The trouble is, what if I'm 100% correct on that and the guy who does it is a fraud?
Right.
Or there was a mistake in the land records.
Right.
Or something got filed after we closed, but before I could record the deed, there was an intervening lien. What if it turns out this guy lied to me and he is got a bankruptcy proceeding, a divorce proceeding, a judgment that hasn't been filed yet? What if the abstractor made a mistake when they were searching the land records?
Right.
Those are the things that really keep me up at night, and those are the things that title insurance covers. So you talk about the contracts. The AAR contract I mentioned earlier doesn't automatically give title insurance. The Huntsville Area Association of Realtors contract, the HAR contract, the one that I said I preferred earlier because I'm more familiar with it, it gives owner's title insurance by default.
Right.
And splits the cost evenly between the parties. That's all negotiable, but man, you want it. I mean, you need title insurance, and the fraud that we see and the seller impersonation is rampant.
Yep.
The idea that people would say, I've got this new idea. Listen, we're going to do title opinions. Title opinions are not a new idea.
No.
They're the old bad idea that title insurance was created to replace more than 100 years ago.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you what, if I were to give a couple bad title opinions and sue me, I'm out of business.
Yeah.
I can't absorb too many of those hits. Okay.
Absolutely.
But the title insurance underwriters, Foundation Title and Escrow is a big company. We've got 28 offices. We're from Cleveland, Ohio, down to the Panhandle of Florida and everywhere in between. But we are an agent, like a broker, an insurance broker, and we sell insurance for these First American, Fidelity, Stewart. And, they're not as common as what you hear like Allstate, State Farm, and Geico. But they're that big.
Yeah.
I mean, they're multi-billion-dollar companies with huge reserves that can absorb these problems.
Yeah.
That's why you get title insurance.
Absolutely. And there's been a big, I'm going to call it the DIY movement online about selling your house yourself or self-insuring throughout everything in life, or is not.
And the self-insurance.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and it's buzzwords, right? People saw it on Reddit. They saw it on YouTube. That somebody cut out the 90% of the info you needed and gave you the buzzwords and the hot take, right? But it sounded, they were very confident when they said it. So where I see it a lot is actually in these taking over somebody else's mortgage. I forget the term for it. Pace Morby's the guy on YouTube that talks everybody into this. And every time I have a listing, I get those calls, a dozen of them, like, hey, would they be willing to sell those? Yeah, the assumption. Yeah.
But it's not an assumption.
Oh, not the assumption. No. The other one.
The wrap mortgage.
Yeah, the wraparound.
So those, here's what that is. Okay. So you come to me and I got a house that I bought at the bottom of the interest rates, and I've got a 2.8% interest rate, and you come in and go, look, man, I know you got some equity. I'll pay you for that, but let me take over your mortgage payments.
Yeah.
All you really want is your equity and your mortgage payment off your plate. And I want your tiny, super low interest rate. It's a win-win. And it would be, but for the fact that that's not the whole story.
Yeah.
The rest of the story is you and I just got married, right? I just gave you my credit. I loaned you my credit so that my credit is dependent upon you making that payment. And if I go turn around to buy another property, my debt to income ratio is messed up because that money is still really primarily my responsibility. Yep. Insurance gets complicated. You lose if you own my house, the homestead's changed because you're probably not living there. You're an investor. You're going to put a tenant in there. Property tax is going to double. And I've seen somebody do one of these. They came to me after the fact and they had cut it so close that when the property taxes doubled, she was losing money.
Yeah.
And she'd sold her house and she's still having to pay for it. It was a wreck. And I'm like, well, and is there insurance on it?
Yeah. Well, and I've seen some of these contracts, right? Because I do receive them on the regular, and it'll have a clause in there that's like, oh, if we don't make your mortgage payment effectively within 30 days, then you have the right to foreclose on us. What average human being in the U.S. knows how to foreclose on something? What laws are around it? And then now if you've got a tenant that's not paying, you've got to deal with eviction laws, right?
Eviction too.
And so you've got all these multiple layers of complications that you as a layperson just do not understand. So you've gotten into hot water because your agent wanted to get a hot sale, get their commission, or you did it DIY and nobody was there to advise you.
Mm-hmm. And the other wrinkle they'll throw at you, and this is probably the biggest thing we didn't talk about, is on those assumptions, your mortgage, in my example, my mortgage, has a due on sale clause.
Yes.
So if I transfer an interest in the property, which I do when I deed it to you, the lender has a right to just go, okay, pay me the whole balance. It's a due on sale right now.
Because they're not in business with the other person.
So the investors have very cleverly come up with an answer for that concern. They say, well, actually, there's a federal law called the St. Germain Act that says if we do a trust, if you put it into a trust, we get around that. Well, what they aren't telling you is that's true, except that I have to remain the beneficiary of the trust, and that is not how these transactions are structured. On paper, everything that goes into the land record says I am, but when the dust settles, I'm supposed to assign my beneficial interest to the investor, to the buyer, and we violated the St. Germain Act, just playing a shell game. And to me, when you're obscuring what you're doing, you're not doing something right.
Of course.
Don't do that.
Yep, absolutely. So we run into that, but it kind of tied it back into what you were talking about with title insurance. A lot of people feel like, oh, I don't need title insurance because there's such a low percentage of claims on those. It's like, well, that's just because the attorneys are doing their job. You never want to call in on your insurance, whether it's your life insurance, your homeowners, your car, or your title. So if the attorney's doing their job correctly, you aren't going, more than likely, you aren't going to have to use it. And it's a low cost compared to the potential loss you have.
It is. I mean, it's the cheapest insurance you can get. You pay for it once. And here in Huntsville, if you use the standard contract, the HART contract, it's split 50-50, and it covers you forever. And it covers the living trust you might do in your estate planning. And if you get the enhanced policy, which is default in Huntsville, it increases by 10% per year in the face value, up to 150%, because your property is hopefully increasing in value. But the title claims are going up because of the rise in impersonation fraud and other fraud. And the claims go up when the market is down.
Yeah. So
when lenders go to foreclose and they look at the records, that's when you get kind of an outsider looking in. These foreclosure attorneys going, do I really want to advertise this and go to the foreclosure sale and then, push somebody out of the property, eject them from the property? Or can I just write a letter and go, hey, I don't have good title.
Yeah.
And boom, my money comes back. That's when claims go up, is when the foreclosures go up.
Sure. Makes sense. Absolutely. And so you actually tangentially touched on something there about foreclosures. And early on, we were talking about right of redemptions, a little different in Alabama too. So let's touch on that too.
Oh boy. Okay. So, I'll try to give you the synopsis. All right.
There we go.
So, typically if there is a foreclosure, you haven't made your payments, they'll advertise your name in the newspaper for a little while to give you notice and say, hey, we're going to sell this thing at the courthouse steps.
Yeah.
And, normally, in most other states, that sale is final. Okay. In Alabama, the former owner, certain people for a certain period of time have a right to pay a certain amount of money and they get the property back.
Right.
Okay. So the certain people are the guy who owned it, his spouse, his children, his heirs, his judgment creditors, junior lien holders, and judgment creditors who become judgment creditors during the period of time.
Right.
The period of time is typically a year or 6 months, depending upon when the mortgage was executed and whether or not the property was a homestead. There's another wrinkle in there, and we won't go down that rabbit hole. And the price that they have to pay is what was paid at the courthouse steps, plus taxes, insurance, interest, and the value of permanent improvements.
Sure.
The value of those permanent improvements is where we start to argue, because did it really need new marble floors? Did it really need whatever? Did it need a roof? Probably. Yeah. But did it need a toilet made of solid gold? I don't know. So those are the arguments. But the point is, when an investor buys something at the courthouse steps for $100,000 and he puts $50,000 in it and sells it for $250,000, somebody could buy it for $150,000.
Yeah.
Right. They could, for the bid price plus the taxes, insurance, interest, value of permanent improvements, $150,000, and then you're buying it for. So there's a risk.
Yep.
We mitigate that risk with. There's different techniques, indemnity bonds. The bonds don't always cover the buyer. They can cover the lender.
Right.
So borrow a lot of money when you do these, accept the risk. Getting something from the seller says, I'll pay you back.
Yeah.
If it does get redeemed, because redemptions are rare.
Yeah.
And that seller agreement to indemnify, title insurance companies get nervous, right?
Yeah.
So they get nervous about those things. So they want to vet this seller, make sure that they're financially secure.
It's another form of self-insurance, right? And this is where, as a real estate agent and broker, it's not my job to make that decision for my clients. It's my job to inform them of what the risks are, right? Mm-hmm. That way they go in and make an educated decision, but they are rolling the die every time they go in and buy one of these foreclosures. And I'll say, in the 4 years I've been selling real estate in Alabama and the 6 previous in Virginia, I had 0 people buy a foreclosure, because once you become educated on it, the average person doesn't want to take on that risk.
Well, I see a lot of people like to buy foreclosures. And in the 20-something years I've been doing this, I've also seen people do redemptions.
Yeah.
And the redemptions are, man, that's an ugly conversation to have with the client. And it's not as hot as it was.
Sure.
After the mortgage crisis, there were so many foreclosures, there were investors running around, and there was a very active investor here in Huntsville who was buying rights of redemption and then going and doing a holdup after it's about, hey, I hope you love your new home, because here's your money, I want it now. And you just have to pay him off.
Yeah.
And he was very active, and he hit somebody who had closed with us. And that guy was, that guy had all the facts, and he knew it, and he took the risks, and it didn't work out his way. So, yeah.
Well, and that's, again, I don't make the decision for him. I just educate him, right? And I mean, I'll give him my opinion, but at the end of the day, it's my opinion. I'm not stroking the check, borrowing the money. So that's really important that clients go into it informed. So last thing I want to touch on in this area, because it is relevant to these other discussions, is what happens with earnest money in Alabama. Because this is, if you do go under contract and you do run into an issue of either non-proper disclosure, or maybe it was properly disclosed by Alabama law, but you ran into a problem down the road, what happens to that earnest money?
Well, there's a lot of misunderstandings. This is a great question, because there's tons of misunderstandings. But like I said at the beginning, a deal's a deal, right? So, and there can be reasonable people who differ on whether or not a deal's been broken. So suppose there's some, it's usually a condition of the property thing,
right,
or was something disclosed, and say, hey, I'm not buying this thing. And a lot of people, buyers from other states, I guess they think that it's kind of my walk away money.
Yeah.
And they say, hey, look, you just keep the earnest money, I'm out. That's not it, because remember, a deal's a deal.
Yeah.
I agreed to sell my house for $350,000. I want $350,000. That's the deal. And if you make me go sell it to somebody else for $300,000, I'm still entitled to $350,000. I'll get the $300,000 from them, but you owe me $50,000, and this $1,000 of earnest money ain't going to cut it.
Yeah.
So, it is not your walk away money. It is good faith money, just to show I got some.
Yeah.
Right. And we hold that money, and we will, if there's a dispute kicks up, we'll interpolate it to the courts and let the courts decide who it belongs to. But, if as a seller, if somebody backs out on a deal and we feel like they breached the contract, we say, look, they can't have their cake and eat it and say, give me the earnest money or you can't sell the house to somebody else. No, you have a duty to mitigate your damages.
Right.
Say, in my example, you bargained for $350, go try to sell it for more, because to succeed in a breach of contract action, you have to prove there's a contract, it was breached, and it caused damages.
Right.
So you had a contract, it was breached, but if you go sell it to somebody else for more than $350, you don't really have any damages. You can give them that earnest money back.
Yep.
So,
you can't go sell the house for $1 to be spiteful.
No, you $340.
I had them.
Be reasonable.
So the way I explain it to people, and correct me if I'm wrong here, is let's say with earnest money, everything goes smooth. We go to closing. It goes towards your closing cost, your down payment, or if you're due more back, then it's refunded to you. Or both parties agree to separate. They decide who gets that mutual release assigned. So seller or buyer gets X amount. Or third, if they can't agree and they didn't go to closing, then it does go to the courts.
Right. I mean, ultimately, we're reluctant to do that. We try to push people because I get to use the money to pay the court costs and the attorney to file it. So I got, and that costs about $1,000. So if you give me $1,000 earnest money, you're fighting over the $20 that's left over, right?
Exactly.
There's nothing left. So we encourage people to sometimes it takes a little time for people to cool off, and sometimes it's on principle,
And this is one of those areas where agent reputation comes in a lot. So people know through my YouTube channel, I've reached a lot of agents locally, as well as the clients that move here that work with me. And sometimes I'll walk through the door, whether it's new construction or a resale. And while I have not worked with that other agent, they're aware of me through my videos and they're aware of what I know and don't know, right? So they have an assumption that I've already educated my client, because I've literally been doing that for 4 years on the internet. And so they're going to play it more straight with me because they know I know my stuff. And they know that my client knows their stuff because I educated them. Versus sometimes I know who's on the other side. Like I'll even warn my clients going to, but hey, if we get into any kind of contention here, we may be in a deeper hole than we should be. So let's take that into account when we build our offer. I'm not saying don't buy the house. The house is the house, regardless of whose name's on the sign. But here's some additional challenges we may run into. We need to dot our I's a little more tightly, cross our T's a little more level.
Well, yeah, and that's where, I said it before, and I'll say it over and over and over, that local expertise is huge.
Yes.
Because it's not just about the other agents and who knows what. It's the builder reputation, the qualities of the home, real estate. Oh, real estate's like kissing. It's all about location, location, location. You need to know what you're doing. Okay. So, if you need to know that in this neighborhood, there are transfer fees. In this neighborhood, there's an HOA fee that's expensive, but that doesn't even include the pool. You got to pay separately for that. Which is a nice way of saying it's also optional. So if you don't want to go to the pool, but those are the things that, real local expertise, is where customers need that. Clients need that.
Well, cool. Well, hey man, I appreciate your time today. We've covered a lot of the things people wouldn't know coming in that they really do need to know. So thanks for coming on, talking about these with us.
Thank you.
If anybody needs to reach Craig, his information, how to get his office will be in the video description.
Thanks so much.
Thanks for watching or listening. You can always catch us on audio on wherever you get your podcast, be Spotify, Apple, or you can watch our video on YouTube. We really appreciate you guys being here. Ask that you subscribe so we can keep you informed of everything going on here in Huntsville.